The night Vivian Ashford's world collapsed didn't arrive with screams or slamming doors. It arrived with the cold click of a Mont Blanc pen. Preston Ashford, the man she had loved for 4 years, slid a stack of documents across the marble table. The smell of fresh ink still clung to them, the smell of betrayal. He didn't even glance at her belly, where their children were steadily growing beneath the thin knit of her sweater. In a Tom Ford suit, his hair perfectly gelled into place, he looked like a real estate kingpin closing a $1 million deal, not a husband ending a marriage. "I'm leaving, Vivian," he said, his voice flat, as if he'd rehearsed it 100 times. "Bianca and I are moving to Miami. It's better that way. Better for him, better for his rising empire, better for the 24-year-old red-haired model who made him feel powerful." Vivian felt the room tilt. The floor seemed to slide out from under her. It was as if all of Manhattan had just shuddered. She whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm pregnant, Preston." He didn't even blink. "Then deal with it. Or don't. It's not my problem anymore." Her breath shattered like glass. The man who used to kiss her forehead every night now couldn't be bothered to meet her eyes. The man who once held her through heart pain was now glancing at his Patek Philippe watch, impatient to walk away. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the penthouse sank into silence. Only the sound of her heartbeat remained, unsteady, irregular, panicked. She clung to the edge of the table, fighting the dizziness rising in her chest. Stress, shock, fear, all of it crashing together until she couldn't breathe. Her doctor had warned her, her heart couldn't take shocks like this. She stumbled toward the door, desperate for air, desperate for anything other than this suffocating emptiness. Outside on Fifth Avenue, the lights blurred. The city spun. Her vision dimmed. Footsteps passed by. No one stopped. Her knees buckled right in front of the Plaza Hotel, and just before she hit the ground, strong hands caught her. Cold, steel gray eyes looked down at her, the scent of cedarwood and winter night. She didn't know who this man was. She didn't know the name Marcus Kensington, the name that made the entire New York underworld bow its head. She didn't know that the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast was about to change her fate completely. If you want to know what happens next, press like to support the channel. Share this video with anyone who loves deeply emotional stories. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next part. Marcus Kensington wasn't used to hesitation. In 20 years ruling New York's underworld, he gave orders without explaining, acted without second-guessing himself. But tonight, with this unfamiliar woman lying motionless in his arms, something made him stop. She was frighteningly light, gaunt, pale. Her skin was cold as December snow. He could feel her heartbeat through the thin knit of her sweater, weak, irregular, like a bird about to break its wings. Viktor Volkov, Marcus's loyal bodyguard for 15 years, hurried to his side. The Russian man's face tightened as he took in the scene. "Boss, we have a meeting with the Chicago Familia in 40 minutes. Marcus didn't answer. He lifted Vivian, one arm bracing her back, the other under her knees. She weighed almost nothing, as if life had drained everything out of her a long time ago. "Get the car ready," Marcus ordered, his voice allowing no argument. "Mount Sinai, the private wing." Viktor opened his mouth, ready to say something about the meeting, about the Chicago bosses waiting, about the millions of dollars hanging over the negotiating table, but one look from Marcus shut him down. The glossy black Mercedes Maybach glided to the curb like a hunting beast. Marcus stepped inside, still holding Vivian tightly against him. She let out a faint groan, her head tipping into his chest, her fingers instinctively clutching his lapel as if she were gripping the only thing she had left. "Move," Marcus told the driver. The car surged into the night. Manhattan's lights smeared across the windows. Marcus looked down at the face of the unfamiliar woman. Tears still clung to her cheeks, stiffening in the cold. Her lips were tinged blue. Her breathing was shallow and quick. His phone kept vibrating. "Victor, Chicago." Urgent calls from the Empire, he ran. Marcus turned the phone off. "Boss." Victor sat in the front seat and twisted around, worry on his face. "The Chicago Familia won't be pleased. They flew from—" "Postpone it," Marcus cut in, his voice cold as steel. "All of it. Postpone everything." Victor fell silent. In 15 years of serving Marcus Kensington, he'd never seen his boss cancel a meeting for anyone. Even when Marcus's mother died, he showed up at the negotiating table on time. But tonight, for a stranger who'd collapsed on the sidewalk, Marcus Kensington was setting his entire empire aside. Mount Sinai rose out of the darkness, The private wing Marcus meant didn't appear on any map. It was for people whose identities were secrets and whose lives could be bought with money. Doctors rushed out the moment the car stopped. They didn't ask the patient's name. They didn't ask who Marcus was to her. They just worked. Fast, professional, silent. Vivian was placed on a gurney and pushed into the emergency room. Marcus followed, his long strides carrying him past nurses who tried to block his way. "Sir, you can't. I can." Marcus didn't slow down. "And I will be here until she's stable." The emergency room doors swung shut. Marcus stood outside, staring through the small window. The doctors were working. Machines beeped. An IV line was fixed into Vivian's arm. Victor stood beside him, silently watching his boss. "Who is she?" he asked softly. Marcus didn't answer, because he didn't know either. He only knew one thing. Her eyes, in the brief instant before she passed out, held a kind of pain he recognized. The pain of betrayal. The pain of being abandoned. The same pain he'd carried for 8 years. And for some reason he still couldn't explain. Marcus Kensington decided that tonight, he wasn't going to leave this woman alone. 2 a.m. The hospital corridor was as empty as a graveyard. Marcus sat on a hard plastic chair, elbows braced on his knees, gray eyes locked on the doors of the emergency room. Victor stood a few steps away, phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in Russian, low and urgent. Short commands, razor-sharp questions. The organization's intelligence network was running at full power. 10 minutes later, Victor ended the call. His face had gone strangely pale. "Boss." Marcus looked up. He knew immediately something was wrong. Viktor Volkov was the kind of man who had witnessed the worst horrors of the underworld without so much as a flicker in his expression. But right now, there was something in his eyes that looked like unease. "I found out who she is." Marcus rose to his feet, tall and imposing in his black suit. "Speak." Victor swallowed. "Her name is Vivian Ashford, 27 years old, no job, no assets in her name, no health insurance." Marcus's brow tightened. Ashford. The name rang through his mind like an alarm bell. "She's been married for 4 years, Victor continued, his voice slowing as if weighing every word. "Her husband is Preston Ashford." The world stopped. Marcus stood there, motionless as stone. That name. The name he'd carved into bone for 8 years. The name he'd sworn he would never forget until the day he closed his eyes for good. Preston Ashford. Memory hit like a tidal wave. 8 years ago. Marcus was 28 then, building his empire from the ashes his father had left behind. Preston Ashford was a business partner, a young real estate man with a charming smile and promises that tasted sweet. They worked together on a major deal, a project that could shift the balance of power along the East Coast. But Preston had his own calculations. He sold information to a rival. He leaked Marcus's travel schedule to people who wanted him dead. He set the trap perfectly, then walked away safely with millions in his pocket. And Daniel, Marcus's 22-year-old brother, who happened to be there on that night shipment, paid with his life. Marcus still remembered it with brutal clarity. Gunfire ripping through the dark. The stink of powder and blood. Daniel sprawled on cold concrete, eyes still open, mouth still trying to say Marcus's name. Marcus held his brother in his arms and felt the warmth leave him, second by second. Daniel died in his hands, and Preston Ashford vanished as if he'd never existed. Marcus had searched. For 8 years, Preston shifted industries and spent the last 7 years building his empire in Europe to stay off Marcus's radar. He only returned to Manhattan 6 months ago, hiding behind a clean legal shell as a real estate titan celebrated by high society. But Marcus didn't forget. Marcus never forgot. "Boss," Victor said quietly, pulling him back to the present. Marcus clenched his fist. His knuckles went white. Rage surged through his veins like volcanic lava. But on the outside, he remained ice cold. That was what made Marcus Kensington terrifying. He didn't explode. He burned everything down in silence. "Preston Ashford," Marcus repeated, his voice low. "The growl of a predator. And his wife is lying in there." Victor nodded. "From what I've got, Preston filed for divorce tonight. He left her for a model named Bianca Moretti. They're on their way to Miami." Marcus stared through the small window into the emergency room. Vivian lay there, small and fragile among machines and IV lines. A woman Preston had thrown away like garbage. A woman carrying the child of the man who killed Marcus's brother. A thought slid through him. Maybe this was fate. Maybe this was the chance he'd been waiting for 8 years. "Find out everything about Preston," Marcus said. his voice stripped of emotion. His assets, his companies, his partners, his mistress, everything he's hiding. I want to know what he eats, where he sleeps, how he breathes. Victor nodded and turned away. Victor, he stopped. Marcus kept his eyes on the room, but his voice carried the oath of the dark. This time, he won't get away. White light pressed through Vivian's eyelids. She caught the smell of antiseptic before she understood where she was. Her head throbbed like it was being split by a hammer. Her throat was raw and burning. Her whole body felt heavy, as if someone had poured lead into her bones. She blinked. Once, twice. The stark white ceiling slowly came into focus. A steady beeping sounded near her ear. An IV was taped to the back of her hand. A hospital. She was in a hospital. Memory crashed over her like floodwater. Preston. Divorce papers. Bianca. Miami. Deal with it. It's not my problem anymore. Vivian jerked upright, her heart skittering out of rhythm. Panic clamped down on her chest, but at once she realized she wasn't alone. A man was sitting in the chair beside her bed. Tall, black hair. A dark suit wrinkled as if he'd been here all night, and steel-cold gray eyes were fixed on her. Vivian recoiled, her back striking the headboard. "Who are you?" she rasped, terrified. "Where am I? What's happening?" The man didn't rush to answer. He rose slowly, keeping his distance as if he didn't want to frighten her more. "You collapsed on the sidewalk on 5th Avenue, he said, his voice low and controlled. "I brought you here. You're safe. Safe." The word sounded like a bitter joke. Vivian didn't know what safe meant anymore. The door opened. A middle-aged woman in a white coat stepped in, a nurse behind her. Her face was serious but not unkind, carrying the practiced composure of someone used to hard cases. "Miss Ashford, I'm Dr. Rachel Coleman," she said, moving to the bedside. "You went through a severe cardiac shock. We stabilized you, but there are some things you need to know." Vivian felt her blood turn to ice. She knew. She knew something terrible was coming. Dr. Coleman watched her carefully. "Did you know you were pregnant?" Vivian gave a weak nod. "I knew. I found out at the end of my first trimester, but I was too afraid of Preston's reaction to tell him, until recently." The doctor drew a slow breath. "Miss Ashford, the ultrasound shows you're not carrying one baby. You're carrying 3. The room pitched. Vivian was sure she'd misheard. 3. 3 babies. Yes. Triplets. Dr. Coleman paused, giving her time to absorb it. "And with your heart condition, this is an extremely dangerous pregnancy." Vivian shook her head, tears spilling out before she could stop them. "No. That can't be. I can't. Your congenital heart disease already makes a single pregnancy high risk," the doctor went on, gentle but unable to hide her concern. "With 3, your heart will have to work many times harder than normal. Any emotional shock could put you and the babies in danger. 3 children, 3 small lives growing inside her. And Preston, their father, had walked away without even looking back." Vivian felt her world collapse a second time in less than 12 hours. She had no home, no money, no insurance, no one. And now she had to face the most dangerous pregnancy of her life alone. A sob tore out of her throat, ragged and desperate. She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking in waves. The pain ripped through her chest, worse than the cardiac shock that had brought her here. Then she felt a hand. Warm. Steady, resting on her hands with gentle firmness. Vivian looked up through tears. The unfamiliar man stood by her bed, his hand holding hers. His gray eyes weren't cold anymore. There was something in them she didn't recognize, or rather, something she didn't dare believe. "You're not alone," he said, his voice low and certain. "I'm here." Vivian stared at him, lost in the storm that was swallowing her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know who I am." Marcus Kensington looked at her, and in that moment he remembered Daniel. He remembered the night his brother lay in his arms and asked the same question before his eyes closed. "Why, big brother?" He didn't answer Vivian. He only tightened his grip on her hand, just a little, and for the first time in hours, Vivian felt a fragile thread of hope flicker in the dark. 3 days passed in the hospital. 3 days of Vivian lying between 4 stark white walls, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she would go the moment she walked out of this place. The penthouse wasn't her home anymore. Preston had changed the locks the very night he left. She knew because a nurse had brought her phone, and a message from the building flashed on the screen, cold and clinical. At Mr. Ashford's request, your access card has been deactivated. She had no family in New York. Her parents were in Ohio, living on a small retirement check. They couldn't even afford plane tickets to visit her, let alone support a daughter carrying triplets with a heart condition. Vivian looked out the window, where Manhattan stretched like a sea of lights, the city of dreams, the city that had crushed her without mercy. A soft knock sounded at the door. Marcus stepped in, still in his familiar black suit, but today he carried a leather briefcase. Dr. Coleman says you can be discharged tomorrow morning, he said, setting the briefcase on the table. Where are you going to go? It was a simple question, but it cut through Vivian like a knife. She didn't have an answer. She didn't have anything. I'll handle it myself, she said, trying to sound steady, failing anyway. Marcus watched her, gray eyes reading every line of her face. He didn't call out the obvious lie. Instead, he opened the briefcase and took out a folder of documents. I have an offer, he said. I own an estate on Long Island. Quiet, secure, plenty of space, and medical staff on site. You can stay there until you give birth. Vivian blinked. Sure, she'd misheard. You're inviting me to live in your house. Yes. Why? She shook her head, confused and wary. You don't know me. I don't know you. I don't even know what you do for a living. Marcus didn't answer that. He only said, You need somewhere safe. I can provide that. Anger flared inside Vivian, tangled with shame and wounded pride. She'd lost everything. Her husband, her home, her money, her dignity, and now a stranger was offering her charity. I'm not a beggar, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I don't need your pity. Marcus didn't flinch at her refusal. He pulled a chair closer and sat down, level with her eyes, his voice dropping in a way she didn't expect. This isn't pity, Vivian. It was the first time he'd said her name. The sound of it made her go still. I saw you fall on that sidewalk, he went on, his voice low and unhurried. I saw you alone among thousands of people walking past, and not one of them stopped. I sat outside the emergency room for 6 hours, waiting for the doctor to tell me whether you were alive or not. Vivian's throat tightened. You're carrying 3 babies, Marcus said. Your heart is weak. You have no home, no money, no one beside you, and you're telling me you'll handle it yourself. Tears rose before she could stop them. She hated herself for crying in front of him. She hated her own weakness. I don't need you to be strong, Marcus said, his voice turning strangely gentle. I just need you to live. You and those 3 babies. Vivian studied him, searching for deceit, for calculation, for anything familiar, anything she'd learned to expect from Preston. But in those cold gray eyes, she saw only something she didn't dare believe. Sincerity. If I agree, she whispered, I'll pay you back, somehow, one day. Marcus gave a small nod. Fine. She drew a shaky breath and surrendered. All right, I'll go. And as she spoke the words, she had no idea she had just stepped into an entirely different world. A world of darkness, power, and deadly secrets. The Mercedes Maybach turned onto a long, vanishing drive, dark green pines on both sides shrouded in the morning fog. Vivian sat in the back seat, staring through the glass, her eyes widening with every passing second. She had pictured a big house, maybe a 2-story villa with a flower garden and a white fence, something out of an American movie she'd once watched. But what rose in front of her wasn't a villa. It was a fortress. A massive structure of stone and glass surged up from an enormous stretch of land, facing the sea head-on. Modern lines blended with an old-world severity, as if the place had been built for kings of a new age. Vivian counted at least 12 security cameras on the main gate alone. Men in black suits were spaced throughout the grounds, earpieces in place, eyes sweeping every direction. Victor opened the car door for her and said, Welcome to Long Island, Miss Ashford. Vivian stepped out, her legs slightly unsteady. The air was salty and cold, flooding her lungs, and she felt pitifully small against all that grandeur. Marcus was waiting at the front entrance. He wasn't wearing a suit today, only a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Yet the authority around him was so heavy that people automatically lowered their heads when he passed. Your room is on the 2nd floor, he said, leading her inside. There's a nurse on duty 24 hours a day. Anything you need, you just say the word. Vivian followed as if in a dream. Inside was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Ceilings soared, a crystal chandelier, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, throwing light back at itself. Paintings hung on the walls that she was sure were worth millions of dollars. Preston was rich. But Preston wasn't this rich. The bedroom meant for her was as large as the entire apartment she'd once lived in. A king-sized bed dressed in pure white sheets. A balcony overlooking the ocean. A private bathroom lined in granite. And a brand new closet, filled with everything from nightgowns to winter coats. "I guessed your size," Marcus said when he saw her looking at the wardrobe. "If anything doesn't fit, someone will replace it immediately." Vivian didn't know what to say. She only nodded, her throat tightening. The first day passed in silence. She ate alone, slept alone. Marcus disappeared into a room at the end of the hall and didn't appear again until evening. Night fell. Vivian couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to distant waves, wondering what she was doing here. Then she heard a voice, low, cold, echoing from the balcony below. Vivian slipped on her robe and quietly opened her door. The hallway was empty. She moved along the carpet without a sound, following the voice. Marcus stood out on the balcony with a phone pressed to his ear, his back to her, moonlight washing over his tall frame as if darkness itself had carved him. "I don't care who he is." Marcus's voice sliced through the night, sharp as a blade. "If he touches my shipment one more time, cut off his hand, both hands." Vivian froze. "And the traitor in Brooklyn?" Marcus went on. "I want him to disappear. Clean. No trace left behind." Vivian's blood turned to ice. She stepped back, then back again, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Disappear. Clean. No trace left behind. That wasn't the language of a businessman. That was the language of a world she'd only ever seen in crime films. She hurried back to her room, shut the door, pressed her back to the wall, breathing fast. Marcus Kensington wasn't a kind man who'd happened to save her. He was something far more dangerous, and she had just stepped into his territory. All night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She lay curled on the bed, eyes wide open in the dark. Marcus's words echoed in her head like a haunted melody. Cut off his hand, make him disappear. Clean. She was living under the roof of a killer. But when dawn broke and sunlight poured through the windows, Vivian faced a bitter truth. She had nowhere else to go. No one else to turn to. Whoever Marcus was, whatever he did in the dark, he was the only one who hadn't abandoned her. She went down to the living room around noon, looking for something to eat. The room was enormous. A large flat screen mounted on the wall. A housekeeper was cleaning, and when she saw Vivian, she lowered her head in greeting, then turned on the television for her before leaving. A news channel was airing a red carpet event in Miami. Vivian was about to change the channel when her eyes went still. Preston. He stood there amid a storm of flashbulbs, in a sleek black tuxedo, hair perfectly gelled, that charming smile on his mouth, and beside him was Bianca Moretti, in a red gown slit high, hair red as fire, clinging to his arm with open affection. They looked like the perfect couple, as if Vivian had never existed. "Mr. Ashford, can you tell us about your previous marriage?" a reporter asked. Preston sighed, his face shifting into a carefully rehearsed kind of sorrow. "It was a difficult time. My ex-wife, Vivian, she has psychological issues. I tried to help her, tried to stay by her side. But," he stopped and shook his head, as if he couldn't bear to go on. Bianca leaned in, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. "Preston has been through so much. She isn't stable, and at times she was even delusional. We hope she gets the help she needs." The reporter nodded. "There are rumors that Miss Ashford is pregnant." Preston shrugged, his expression turning ice cold. "I don't know anything about that. And honestly, given her mental state, I'm not sure motherhood is the right decision for her." The remote slipped from Vivian's hand. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at the screen as if she were staring into hell. Preston was destroying her. In front of the whole world, he was turning her into a mad woman, a burden, a woman unfit to be a mother. And people believed him. Of course they did. Preston Ashford, successful businessman, handsome, charming, and who was she? A nameless woman with no voice. Tears spilled out before she could stop them. She crumpled to the floor, arms around her belly, sobbing, 3 babies inside her, 3 lives whose father had just publicly denied them and shamed her. Vivian. A low voice sounded behind her. She didn't turn around. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, least of all Marcus. But he was there. He had seen everything. Marcus stepped closer and took the remote, turning off the television. The screen went black, But Preston's words still hung in the air like poisonous smoke. "He's ruining me," Vivian whispered, her voice breaking. "He has money, power, the media, and I have nothing." Marcus lowered himself in front of her. Gray eyes held hers without a flicker. "You have me?" Vivian shook her head, tears still falling. "You don't understand. You can't fight Preston. No one can." A faint smile crossed Marcus's mouth, not warm, the smile of a predator who had just found his prey. "Vivian," he said, his voice low as far-off thunder. "You don't know who I am. You don't know what I can do. But I promise you one thing." He rose and looked out the window, where the ocean stretched without end. "Preston Ashford will regret what he did to you, and he will pay for every lie he told today." Vivian looked at him, her heart racing. She didn't know whether to believe him or fear him, maybe both. But in the storm that was swallowing her, Marcus Kensington was the only anchor she had left. A week passed. Vivian slowly grew used to the rhythm of life inside the estate. She ate on schedule, took her medication at the right dose, walked in the garden when the weather allowed. A nurse checked her heart every day. Dr. Coleman came twice a week. Everything was perfect, too perfect. But the question of Marcus still haunted her every night. Who was he? What did he do? How could he say such terrifying things without a tremor in his voice? Vivian tried to push the thoughts away. She told herself she shouldn't be curious, that her safety and the safety of the 3 babies mattered more than any answer. But instinct wouldn't let her look away. That afternoon, Marcus was out. Victor wasn't there either. The estate was strangely quiet. Vivian wandered the corridor, her feet carrying her wherever her eyes drifted. She stopped in front of the last room on the first floor, the room she had never once seen anyone enter. The door was heavy oak, different from the other doors in the house. She didn't mean to go in. She truly didn't. But when her hand touched the knob and it turned, her legs carried her over the threshold. It was an office, a walnut desk, bookcases rising to the ceiling, and a glass cabinet in the corner. Vivian went still. Inside the cabinet were guns, dozens of them, handguns, rifles, the kind of things she'd only ever seen in action movies. They were arranged neatly, polished, bright, like a priceless collection. She stumbled back, her heart battering itself apart. Her foot caught something. A box fell, popped open, and dozens of bullets spilled onto the floor, clinking as they rolled and struck each other. "You shouldn't be in here." The voice behind her nearly made Vivian faint. She spun around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, but his gray eyes had darkened. Vivian trembled, her back pressed to the wall. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Who are you really?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Vivian felt the air thicken, heavy and suffocating. "Do you really want to know?" he asked, his voice low and slow. Vivian nodded, even as her body screamed at her to run. Marcus walked to the window and stared out at the sea. Silence stretched so long Vivian thought he might say nothing at all. Then he began. "I control most of the underground operations on the East Coast," he said, his voice stripped of emotion. "Drugs, weapons, gambling, everything you can imagine about the criminal world. I'm involved in it." Vivian felt the floor fall away beneath her. "People call me many things," Marcus went on. "Boss, Kensington, the shadow of Manhattan. I'm not a good man, Vivian. I never have been." She wanted to run, to scream, to get out of this place right now. But her legs wouldn't move. "Why are you telling me?" she asked, her voice shaking. Marcus turned to look at her. And in that moment, Vivian saw something in his eyes. Not coldness, not cruelty, pain. "Because you deserve the truth," he said. "And because I owe you an explanation." He went to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a photograph. He handed it to Vivian. In the picture were 2 young men. One was Marcus, younger, less sharp-edged. The other had the same eyes, but warmer, with a bright, easy smile. "My brother," Marcus said, his voice going rough. "Daniel. 8 years ago, he died in an ambush, shot 3 times. He lay in my arms until his last breath left him." Vivian stared at the photo, her heart tightening. The man who betrayed us. The man who sold information to our enemies. The man who indirectly killed Daniel. Marcus paused, and his gray eyes lit with a dark fire. Was Preston Ashford. The photo slipped from Vivian's fingers. She couldn't believe it. Preston. Her husband. The father of the babies inside her. A killer. That's why you saved me, she whispered, suddenly understanding. To get revenge on Preston. Marcus looked at her and didn't deny it. At first, maybe, but now it isn't only that. Vivian stood there in a room full of guns and ammunition, facing a mafia boss who had just admitted everything. She knew she should run. She knew she should be afraid. She knew she should escape. But she thought of Preston, of his lies, of the way he'd thrown her away like trash, and she realized something. Marcus Kensington might be a monster, but Preston Ashford was worse, because Preston wore the mask of an angel. I'm staying, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I have nowhere else to go, and whoever you are, you didn't abandon me. Marcus studied her for a long time. Then he nodded. You're braver than you think, Vivian. She didn't know if it was bravery. Maybe it was only desperation. But that night, lying in bed, she realized something strange. She wasn't afraid of Marcus anymore. She was more afraid of Preston. 3 days after the confrontation in the office, everything between Vivian and Marcus changed in a subtle way. No more suspicious questions. No more searching looks. She knew who he was. He knew she knew. And that truth, as dark as it was, strangely brought something that felt almost like trust. That morning, Vivian was sitting in the living room reading when Victor walked in. The Russian man's face, usually blank, was tense in a way that felt unusual. He didn't look at her. He only said, "The boss needs to see you," then turned and walked out. Vivian followed Victor to Marcus's office, the room where she had discovered the gun collection days before. Now she stepped inside with a different state of mind. No fear, only a readiness for whatever was about to happen. Marcus stood by the desk, holding a thick file. Victor stood beside him, his face like stone. "Sit down, Vivian," Marcus said, his voice lower than usual. She sat in the leather chair, her belly beginning to show beneath her sweater. Her heart picked up speed, instinct telling her something was wrong. Marcus set the file on the desk in front of her. "Victor has been investigating Preston for the past 2 weeks. We pulled this from the storage system of the insurance company he uses." Vivian looked down. Legal documents, dense with fine print and red stamps. She picked them up and began to read, and the blood in her veins slowly turned to ice. They were agreements relinquishing custody, agreements dividing property, agreements acknowledging psychological issues. All of them bore her signature. The document was dated just 2 weeks ago, shortly after he discovered the pregnancy. "I didn't sign these," Vivian whispered, her voice shaking. "I've never seen these papers in my life." "We know," Marcus said. The signature was forged. Victor had it examined. "The pen strokes don't match your real signature samples." Vivian studied it again. The signature looked like hers, so close it was sickening. But something was off. The slant was slightly different. The final stroke didn't curve the way it should. She'd signed her name thousands of times. She knew that wasn't hers. 6 months ago, she murmured, trying to remember. "Preston and I, we were still fine then. We'd just taken a trip to the Bahamas. He even bought me that necklace." She stopped, something horrifying clicking into place. "He was planning it back then," she whispered. "Before I got pregnant. Before Bianca even existed." Marcus nodded, his gray eyes darkening. "Preston didn't leave you because of that model. He decided to get rid of you a long time ago. Bianca was just an excuse." Victor spoke, his tone even, as if reading from a report. "According to our investigation, Preston began moving assets under a subsidiary 8 months ago. He opened a secret account in Switzerland 10 months ago. He met Bianca Moretti for the first time at a charity event 5 months ago, 1 month after he forged your signature." Vivian felt sick, and it wasn't pregnancy. It was the truth closing around her throat. Everything she'd believed was real had been a lie. The kisses, the declarations, the nights Preston held her and told her she was everything to him. All of it had been performance, and behind her back, step by step, he'd been preparing to push her over the edge. "But why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What did I do wrong? I loved him. I gave him everything." Marcus looked at her, and for a moment, the coldness on his face eased. "You didn't do anything wrong, Vivian. Preston Ashford is a man who can't love anyone but himself. He married you because you were useful to his image. And when he decided you weren't useful anymore, he threw you away the way you throw away an old object." Tears streamed down Vivian's cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them. She let them fall, carrying away whatever illusions she still had about her marriage. "He slept beside me," she whispered, "every night." While he was plotting to destroy me, Marcus moved closer and lowered himself to her level. He didn't touch her. He was simply there, steady and silent. "Vivian," he said, his voice low but unshakable. "He will pay, I promise you. Every forged page, every lie, every night he pretended to love you. He will pay for all of it." Vivian looked into Marcus's gray eyes, and there she saw something Preston had never had. The truth. 2 weeks after discovering the forged documents, Vivian's life settled into the strange rhythm of the Long Island estate. She ate on time, rested properly, and her pregnancy had passed the 24th week. The 3 babies inside her were healthy, kicking hard every night as if to remind their mother they were still there. But peace never lasted. That afternoon, Vivian was sitting in the garden reading when a siren shrieked through the air. She jolted to her feet, her book slipping into the grass. Everywhere, men in black suits sprinted toward the front gate, hands sliding inside their jackets as if gripping something. Victor appeared at her side in an instant. "Get inside! Now, Miss Ashford. What's happening?" Victor didn't answer. He took her by the elbow, gentle but firm, steering her toward the back door. As Vivian moved, she looked over her shoulder, and she saw it. A sleek black Bentley had stopped at the gate, and the man stepping out made her heart stop. Preston Ashford. He stood there in an expensive navy suit, sunglasses hiding half his face, still perfect and self-possessed as always, as if he hadn't just thrown his wife away, as if he hadn't forged signatures to destroy her. "I know my wife is here," Preston shouted, his voice carrying across the garden. "Bring her out, right now." Marcus's guards blocked him. Preston tried to push through, but they stood like walls of steel that wouldn't move. Then the front doors opened. Marcus Kensington stepped outside. He didn't hurry. He didn't rush. Each step was steady and measured, like the knock of fate. Late afternoon sunlight struck his face and sharpened the gray of his steel-cold eyes. Preston saw Marcus, and in the first moment, he laughed in contempt. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dripping with scorn. "The new lover. She ran here fast. I barely finished divorcing her and she's already found a new rich man." Marcus said nothing. He kept walking toward Preston, then stopped a few steps away. "Look," Preston went on, arrogant and loud. "I don't know how long you've been sleeping with my wife, but she's still my wife legally, and the kids in her belly are mine. I have rights. Ashford." One word. Marcus's voice was low and cold, cutting Preston off mid-sentence. Preston froze, frowning. "You know my name." Marcus took one more step closer. The angle of the light shifted, and shadow fell across his face in a way that made Preston instinctively step back. 8 years, Ashford," Marcus said, his voice like the growl of a beast. 8 years I've been waiting for this day." Preston blinked, his eyes narrowed, searching memory. Then the blood drained from his face in an instant. "Kensington," he breathed, his voice shaking. "Marcus Kensington. Finally you remember." Preston backed up again, then again. His confidence vanished completely, replaced by raw, primal fear. He knew that name. He knew it too well. 8 years ago, he'd betrayed this man. He'd sold information, taken the money, and disappeared. He thought he'd escaped. He thought Marcus would never find him. He was wrong. "Daniel," Marcus said, the name dropping like a sentence. "My brother, 22 years old, dead from 3 bullets on the night my enemies ambushed us." "Do you know who sold them the information?" Preston didn't answer. He trembled like a leaf. "You did." "Ashford," Marcus went on, stepping closer. "You killed my brother, and now you stand here, on my territory, demanding your ex-wife like you have any right. I didn't know," Preston stammered. That was an accident. I didn't mean—" Silence. One word, and Preston stopped cold. Marcus stood in front of him, nearly a head taller, utterly dominant. "Vivian Ashford is under my protection now," Marcus said, each word clear as if carved into stone. "The children inside her are, too. You are not allowed near them, not allowed to contact them, not allowed to speak their names. She's my wife. She's nothing to you anymore." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "And if you touch her again, I'll do to you what I should have done 8 years ago." Preston swallowed, his face white as a corpse. "Get out," Marcus said. "And remember this. The war has begun." Preston turned and ran for his car like something was chasing him. The Bentley roared to life and tore away, tires shrieking over gravel. Marcus stood there, watching until the car vanished beyond the gate. Vivian, still at the back door, had seen everything. And she understood one thing. She wasn't afraid of Marcus Kensington anymore. She was afraid for Preston, because the fury in those gray eyes wasn't something money or power could extinguish. It could only be soothed with blood. 8 weeks had passed since the day Preston showed up at the estate gate. 8 weeks of fragile peace. Vivian had entered the 32nd week of her pregnancy. Her belly was stretched tight like a ball, heavy with 3 small lives growing day by day. Dr. Coleman said she was doing very well, that all 3 babies were developing strongly, that if luck held she might carry them to week 36 or 37. Vivian started to believe everything would be all right. She started to let herself hope, but fate had other plans. That night, Vivian woke at 2 o'clock in the morning. The pain came without warning, like a knife driven straight through her belly. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out, only a choked breath and trembling hands clutching her stomach. No, not yet. It was too soon. The second wave hit. Stronger, deeper, as if something were tearing her apart from the inside. Vivian rolled out of bed and fell to the floor, and her cry finally broke free. The hallway lights snapped on. Footsteps thundered. The bedroom door flew open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face going pale when he saw her on the floor, arms wrapped around her belly, her features twisted with pain. Vivian. He surged to her in an instant, dropping to his knees and lifting her. What's happening? Pain, she gasped, tears spilling. It hurts so much, Marcus. The babies. He didn't need to hear more. He scooped her up and ran into the hallway. Victor was already waiting by the stairs, phone to his ear, barking orders in Russian. The Mercedes Maybach was running the moment they reached the drive. Mount Sinai, Marcus ordered, his voice cold as ice. But Vivian could feel his heart slamming wild beneath his shirt. Warn them. Obstetric emergency. Triplets. Threatened preterm labor. The car tore into the night. Manhattan smeared across the windows. Vivian lay in Marcus's arms as contractions came in waves like a tidal surge, each one stronger than the last. She cried. She prayed. She gripped Marcus's hand like it was the only thread keeping her tied to the world. Don't let my babies die, she begged, her voice breaking. Please, don't let my babies die. No one's dying, Marcus said, his voice hard as iron. Do you hear me? No one's allowed to die. The hospital hit them in a blur. Harsh white lights. Shouting. The rattle of a gurney over the floor. Vivian was transferred onto the stretcher and rushed down the corridor, and she caught only one glimpse of Marcus's face before the emergency doors slammed shut. Dr. Coleman was already there. She stared at the monitor, her expression tight. Cervix is 4 centimeters, she told the team. Fetus B is showing signs of cardiac distress. Prep the operating room immediately. Everything after that moved like a nightmare. The surgical lights, blinding. The machines, shrieking and constant. The thick bite of antiseptic in the air. Vivian lay on the operating table, her body numb from the chest down, eyes fixed on a ceiling so white it felt unreal. She heard doctors speaking, heard the instruments, but she couldn't feel a thing. Then a cry rang out, tiny, weak, but unmistakable. Vivian's tears spilled. Her baby. Her baby was crying. A second cry, then a third. 3 babies. 3 small lives. Alive. All 3 are stable, Dr. Coleman said, relief in her voice. Take them to the NICU right away. Vivian smiled. For the first time in months, she truly smiled. Her babies were alive. Every suffering had been worth it. But the joy lasted only seconds. The monitor beside her suddenly screamed. The heartbeat line on the screen lurched wildly, then collapsed into a single straight line. Lost rhythm, a nurse shouted. Blood pressure dropping. She's bleeding internally. Dr. Coleman lunged to Vivian's side, her face shifting from relief to alarm. Get the defibrillator. Push epinephrine. Now. Vivian's world went dark. She couldn't hear her babies anymore. Couldn't see the operating lights. There was only darkness. Cold. Endless. Outside the operating room, Marcus stood behind the glass, seeing it all. He saw doctors running in frantic motion. He saw the paddles pressed to Vivian's chest. He saw her body jolt, then go still. We're losing her, someone shouted. Marcus stood there with his fists clenched so tightly his nails cut into his palms, blood seeping out, and he didn't even notice. For the first time in 20 years, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast felt completely helpless. And for the first time since Daniel died, he prayed. 3 minutes. 180 seconds. That was how long Vivian's heart stopped. The defibrillator paddles hit her chest the first time. No response. The second time. The flat line on the monitor stayed cruelly unbroken. The third time, Dr. Coleman shouted instructions, sweat beading on her forehead. Around her were the sounds of machines, feet pounding, someone whispering a prayer under their breath. Then a beep, faint, trembling, but real. The line on the screen began to jump. Up, down, up, down. Her heartbeat returned. "She's back," a nurse cried. Dr. Coleman let out a shaking breath. "Stabilize her blood pressure. Get more blood in. She's lost too much." Outside the operating room, Marcus was still standing there like a stone statue. He watched the doctors begin to steady themselves. He watched the monitor settle into its regular pulse. He watched Vivian lying motionless, but her chest finally rising and falling again. He unclenched his fists. Blood from the crescents his nails had carved into his palms dripped onto the floor. He didn't notice. She was alive. Vivian woke 12 hours later. Her throat was raw. Her whole body ached as if she'd been run over. But she was alive. "The babies," was the first word she managed, her voice hoarse. Marcus sat beside the bed, his gray eyes reddened from lack of sleep. Stubble shadowed his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a completely different man from the cold kingpin she'd come to know. "All three are healthy," he said, his voice low and gentle. "They're in the neonatal intensive care unit. Do you want to see them?" Vivian nodded, tears spilling before she'd even seen them. She did, more than anything in the world. Marcus called a nurse. They lifted Vivian into a wheelchair and rolled her down the stark white corridor. Marcus walked beside her with one hand on the back of the chair, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he didn't keep contact. The NICU was warm and quiet. The lights were soft. And there, inside 3 tiny clear boxes, were her 3 angels. Vivian pressed her hand to the glass and looked at the first baby. So small, so red, eyes closed tight, chest rising in steady little breaths. "A girl," the nurse said. 2.1 kilograms. Healthy. Vivian moved to the second incubator. "A boy. A little smaller, but his fist was clenched like a fighter. 2 kilograms, the nurse continued. "His lungs are a bit weak, but he's improving well." The third incubator. Another girl, the smallest of the 3, but when Vivian touched the glass, the baby stirred, as if she could feel her mother there. 1.8 kilograms. She needs closer monitoring. "But she's a warrior," Vivian cried. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something she'd thought she'd lost a long time ago. Happiness. Her children. 3 small lives Preston had told her to deal with. 3 lives she had nearly bought with her own. They were here. They were alive. They were hers. Tears ran down her cheeks, and Vivian didn't try to wipe them away. She didn't have the strength. She only wanted to look, to keep looking, to look until she was sure this wasn't a dream. Then a hand touched her cheek. Gentle, warm, wiping away the tears as they fell. Vivian turned. Marcus stood there, his gray eyes no longer cold. In them was something she'd never seen in him before. Tenderness, care, and maybe, just maybe, something deeper. "You did it," he said, his voice low as a whisper. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Vivian looked at him. The Mafia boss, the killer, the shadow of Manhattan. But right now, standing in front of 3 newborns and a mother who had come back from death, he was only a man who hadn't left. She took his hand, weak but sure. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Marcus didn't speak. He only tightened his grip on her hand. And in that moment, inside a room of incubators and steady breathing machines, something between them changed. Forever. 2 weeks after the surgery, Vivian was discharged. The 3 babies still had to stay in the NICU for a while longer, but Dr. Coleman said they were improving better every day. Vivian visited them every morning and every evening, sitting for hours beside the incubators, singing lullabies and whispering to those tiny lives how much their mother loved them. She started to believe the storm had passed, that life was finally smiling at her. But Preston Ashford had never accepted defeat. That morning, Marcus walked into the living room with a thick envelope in his hand. His face was colder than usual, his gray eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. "Vivian, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, and set the envelope on the table in front of Vivian. She opened it, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. It was a lawsuit. Preston Ashford was suing for custody, full custody. Attached were dozens of pages of documents, forged medical reports, statements from witnesses she'd never met, and a psychological evaluation declaring that Vivian Ashford had borderline personality disorder, had self-destructive tendencies, and was not fit to be a mother. Vivian whispered, "He's calling me crazy. He's telling the court I don't deserve my own children." But that wasn't all. The next page was even more horrifying. Preston accused Vivian of living with a dangerous criminal element, placing the children in an unsafe environment, and having an illicit relationship with a notorious Mafia boss. He attached photographs of Vivian and Marcus at the hospital, at the estate, even the moment Marcus wiped her tears in the NICU. Marcus said Preston was watching them, that someone in the hospital was working for him. Vivian let the file slip from her hands, shaking so hard she couldn't hold it. She'd nearly died to bring those children into the world. She'd traded everything, and now Preston wanted to steal them from her. She said he wasn't allowed. He couldn't do this. He'd abandoned her. He told her to deal with the pregnancy. He had no right. But stop, Vivian. Marcus cut her off bitterly. Preston has the money, the lawyers, and the media on his side. But more importantly, he holds the forged papers you unknowingly signed 6 months earlier, turning your own signature into a weapon against you. Vivian remembered the sheets Preston had told her to sign for the company, the way he said it was just procedure. She'd believed him. She'd signed without reading. And now those signatures were becoming the weapon that would destroy her. She whispered that she was going to lose her children, that if the court believed him, she would lose them. Marcus knelt in front of her, took both her hands, and gripped them tight. He said she wouldn't lose her children, and he wouldn't let that happen. But Vivian knew this war wouldn't be easy. Preston had everything, and what did she have? A Mafia boss whose identity, if exposed, would only make the case worse. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Vivian meant to ignore it, but the words on the screen froze her. It said she wasn't Preston Ashford's first victim, and she should look into Meredith Collins. She read it again and again. Meredith Collins. A name completely unfamiliar. Vivian called out to Marcus, her hands trembling. "Marcus, look at this. Someone just texted me." Marcus read the message, his gray eyes narrowing. Then he took out his own phone and called Victor, ordering him to find everything on Meredith Collins, everything connected to Preston Ashford. 2 hours later, Victor returned with a thin file. He read that Meredith Collins was 32 years old, a former attorney at a firm in Boston, and 6 years ago she had been Preston Ashford's fiancée. Vivian was stunned. Preston had been engaged before her. He'd never said a word. Victor continued, saying Meredith vanished from Boston right before the wedding, and Preston claimed she ran away because of psychological problems. But Victor's investigation showed Meredith hadn't vanished. Preston had destroyed her. He forged evidence that she'd embezzled company money. He spread rumors that she was mentally ill. She lost her job, lost her home, lost everything. In the end, she had to change her name and move to Vermont to live in hiding. Vivian listened as if she were hearing her own story. Preston had done the same thing to another woman 6 years ago, and he was repeating it with her. Vivian asked, her voice raw, if Meredith was still alive. Victor nodded and said she was, and according to the address he'd found, she was still in Vermont. Vivian looked at Marcus, and her eyes flared with the first spark of hope. She said she needed to meet her, that Meredith Collins might be the only person who could help her. Vivian was packing for the trip to Vermont when the gate buzzer rang. She looked out the window and saw guards surrounding a taxi. Someone was trying to get into the estate. Marcus went outside, Victor close behind. Vivian came down the stairs, curious and uneasy. The person who stepped out of the taxi made her go completely still. Bianca Moretti. The red-haired model looked nothing like the arrogant image on the Miami red carpet a few months earlier. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her lips were split, and on her left cheek, a large bruise showed clearly beneath smeared makeup. "Please let me in," Bianca said, her voice shaking. "I need to talk to Vivian. Please." The guards looked to Marcus for orders. Marcus stared at Bianca with eyes as cold as ice. "You're Preston's mistress," he said. "Why should I let you into my house?" Bianca choked out through her sobs. "If I don't come to you, Preston will kill me. He'll kill me just like he was going to kill Vivian." Vivian stepped into the doorway. She looked at the woman who had taken her husband, the woman who had smiled triumphantly on the Miami carpet, the woman who had called her unstable in front of millions. Rage flared in Vivian's chest, but then she saw the bruise on Bianca's cheek, saw the fear in her eyes, saw the way she trembled like an injured bird. "Let her in," Vivian said. Marcus turned to her, frowning. "Vivian, let her in," Vivian repeated. "I want to hear what she has to say." They brought Bianca into the living room. She sat on the sofa, folded in on herself as if she wanted to disappear. Vivian sat opposite her, keeping her distance, but never taking her eyes off the woman in front of her. "Speak," Vivian said coldly. "Why are you here?" Bianca drew a shaky breath. "Preston isn't who I thought he was," she began, her voice breaking. "At first he was perfect, polished, generous, saying sweet things. But after I moved in with him, everything changed." She stopped and touched the bruise on her cheek. "He hit me," Bianca whispered. "The first time was 2 months ago. I said the wrong thing at a party. He waited until we got home, and then he slapped me. He slapped me and looked me in the eyes," Bianca whispered. "He told me, 'This is your fault, Bianca,' and God help me, I believed him." Vivian listened, her heart tightening. Preston had never hit her, but he had destroyed her in other ways, through coldness, through control, through lies as sweet as honey. "Then he hit me more often," Bianca went on. "Every time he got angry. Every time he drank. Every time he felt out of control. He blamed you. Said you were trying to ruin him. Said he had to fight to take back his honor." Bianca opened her handbag and pulled out a small USB drive. "I found this in his safe," Bianca said. "He thinks I don't know the code, but I watched him." Marcus stepped forward and took the drive. "What's on it?" "Everything," Bianca said. "Forged documents, fraud contracts, emails with his lawyer about how to destroy Vivian. And," she stopped, swallowing hard, "a detailed plan to take custody and then send the children into foster care. Vivian felt sick. He doesn't want to raise them. He just wants to take them away from me." Bianca nodded, tears spilling again. "One more thing," she whispered, her hand going to her belly. "I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. The room fell silent. Vivian stared at Bianca, at the trembling hand on her stomach, and she understood. She understood why Bianca was here, not because of conscience, but because of fear, because Bianca had realized she was about to become the next victim. "You know what he'll do to you when he finds out you're pregnant," Vivian said slowly. Bianca broke down, sobbing. "He'll force me to end it, or he'll do to me what he did to you. I don't have anyone. I don't know where to go. I only know you're the only person who understands who Preston really is." Vivian stood and walked to Bianca. She looked down at the woman who had once been her enemy. She could throw her out. She could make her figure it out alone. She could take revenge for everything Bianca had helped cause. But Vivian didn't. She sat beside Bianca and rested a hand on her shoulder. "You'll stay here," Vivian said, her voice gentler than she expected. "And you'll help me put Preston in prison." Bianca looked up, eyes red and wide with shock and gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "After everything I did." Vivian met her gaze, and in that moment, she didn't see the woman who stole her husband. She saw another woman Preston had deceived and broken. "Because we're both victims of the same evil man," Vivian said, "and victims have to protect each other." That night, Marcus sat in the office and opened the USB Bianca had brought. Victor stood beside him, his face tight with tension. Vivian sat on the sofa in the corner of the room, both hands clenched together, her heart pounding hard in her chest. The computer screen lit up. Hundreds of files appeared. Documents, contracts, emails, images, audio recordings, everything arranged neatly into folders, as if Preston were keeping a collection of his own crimes. Marcus opened the first folder and found emails between Preston and his lawyer, discussing how to remove Vivian from every legal entitlement. The second folder held forged signature documents Victor had uncovered earlier. The third folder was filled with covert photographs of Vivian, tracking her every step for months. But the final folder was what froze the entire room. The folder name was Backup Plan. Marcus clicked it. A PDF file appeared. He read the title, and his fist tightened until his nails cut deep into his palm. Emergency Medical Consent Form. Vivian stepped to Marcus's side and stared at the screen, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. It was a legal document, with her signature forged onto it, declaring that if she suffered a severe medical complication and couldn't make decisions, Preston Ashford, as her legal husband, would have full authority to decide the fate of the fetuses, including the right to terminate the pregnancy if necessary. Vivian read it again and again, unable to believe what she was seeing. "He meant to kill my babies," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If I died on the operating table, He would have had the right to order the doctors to deal with the fetuses. She remembered the night she gave birth. Her heart had stopped for 3 minutes. 3 minutes that, if they'd stretched a little longer, would have given Preston the power to step into that operating room and demand whatever he wanted done to the 3 children. Nausea surged up, and Vivian had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. He never wanted them to live, she said, tears spilling. Not from the beginning. He planned it so that if I didn't deal with the pregnancy, he'd do it himself. Marcus didn't speak. He sat there staring at the screen, his face carved from stone, but beneath that cold shell, his fury boiled like volcanic lava. Then he stood. The movement was so sudden, so violent, that the chair skidded back and crashed to the floor. Victor stepped back on instinct. Vivian flinched. Marcus went to the window and braced his hands against the glass, his back to them. His shoulders were rigid. His breathing was heavy. The whole room felt compressed under the weight of his rage. Victor said softly, carefully, "Boss." Marcus didn't answer. He stood there, looking into the darkness, and Vivian could see his reflection in the window. His gray eyes turned black, his jaw clenched tight, his face no longer that of a businessman or even a mafia boss, but the face of a man ready to kill. 8 years, Marcus said, his voice low like a growl from hell. 8 years I told myself I'd wait for the right moment, that I'd take revenge with calculation, that I wouldn't let emotion drive me. He turned, those blackened eyes fixing on Vivian. "But he meant to kill your children," he said, each word branded in fire. "He meant to kill innocent babies, the way he killed Daniel." Vivian didn't dare breathe. Marcus walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a gun. He checked the magazine, the motion smooth and exact, like he'd done it thousands of times. Vivian said his name, trembling, and told him not to. He stopped and looked at her. "He has to die," he said, his voice empty of emotion. Tonight, Vivian rose and stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "No," she said, steady despite her racing heart. "Not like this. If you kill him, you'll go to prison. My children will lose you. I'll lose you." She stopped, hearing what she'd just said, "lose you," and wondering when she'd started thinking of Marcus as part of her life. Marcus stared at her, his eyes still dark, but something in him wavered. "He deserves to die," he said. "He deserves to be destroyed," Vivian answered. "To lose everything, to watch the world he built collapse piece by piece. Death is too fast, too easy for someone like him." She placed her hand on his arm, gentle. "Bring him into the light," she whispered. "Let the whole world see the monster he really is. That's real revenge." Marcus looked at her for a long time, then slowly lowered the gun. "Fine," he said, his voice still cold, but softened. "We'll do it your way. But if he touches you or the children again, nothing will stop me." Vivian nodded, and in that moment she knew the war was about to enter its final stage. They returned to Long Island late at night. Vivian was exhausted after the trip, but her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. Meredith had agreed. Vivian had a witness. She had evidence. She had a chance to win. But Preston Ashford wasn't the kind of man who would sit still and wait to die. 3 days after the Vermont trip, Victor walked into Marcus's office with tension carved into his face. He said, in a low voice, that their people had spotted 3 hired gunmen watching the estate, that they were from Chicago, that the contract was for $500,000. Marcus wasn't surprised. He knew Preston would strike back. Preston was a coward who never wanted to dirty his own hands, but he had money, and money could buy the death of anyone. Marcus asked, cold as ice, "Only 3? Victor nodded and said Preston was underestimating him. Marcus stood, shrugged into his suit jacket, and checked the gun in his desk drawer. He told Victor to keep Vivian inside, to reinforce protection outside her room, and not to let her know what was happening. Victor hesitated and said she would ask, but Marcus cut him off and told him to say he had something to handle, that this was his matter and not hers. That night, Marcus vanished from the estate. Vivian didn't know where he went. She only knew that when she woke the next morning, he still hadn't returned, and Victor refused to answer any of her questions. She worried. She was afraid. But she understood, too. Marcus was protecting her in the only way he knew. In an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, the 3 hired gunmen were strapped to chairs, blood running from wounds on their faces. Around them, Marcus's men stood silent as ghosts. Marcus walked in, weak light cutting across his stone-cold face. He pulled up a chair and sat opposite the leader, a man with a long scar running across his cheek. Marcus asked, calmly, "Who hired them?" as if he were asking about the weather. The scarred man spat onto the floor and said he didn't know. The contract came through a broker. Marcus nodded, not surprised. He'd known the answer before he asked. He only wanted to hear it out loud. Then Marcus said the name Preston Ashford, slowly, and asked if they understood who they were touching. The scarred man sneered and said a businessman with a lot of money, and that they didn't care. Marcus smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. He told them they didn't know who he was, but they would. He stood, took off his suit jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. Victor handed him a pair of pliers. Marcus said he was going to send a message to Preston Ashford, and they would be the ones to carry it. What happened in that warehouse that night was never spoken of. Marcus's people cleaned everything so thoroughly that nothing was left behind. But the next morning, Preston Ashford received a wooden box at his office in Miami. Inside were 3 pinky fingers and a slip of paper with a handwritten line that said, "Next time it will be heads, K." Preston stared into the box, his face turning the color of a corpse. His hands shook so badly he had to grip the edge of his desk to keep from collapsing. He knew exactly whose K that was. He knew he'd kicked a hornet's nest. But he'd gone too far to stop now. Back on Long Island, Marcus returned in the afternoon. He showered, changed his clothes, and moved through the house as if nothing had happened. When he came down to the living room, Vivian was waiting. She asked where he'd gone all night, worry filling her eyes. Marcus looked at her. He didn't lie, but he didn't give her the truth either. He told her he had something to take care of, and she didn't need to worry. Vivian studied him, the gray eyes that were trying to hide something. She wasn't foolish. She knew he'd done something the night before. She knew it had to do with Preston, and she knew she shouldn't push for more. Instead, she asked softly if he was hurt. Marcus blinked, startled by the question. He'd braced himself for anger, for judgment, for fear, but not for concern. He told her no, that he was fine. Vivian nodded, stepped closer, and rested her hand on his arm. She thanked him, quietly, for protecting her. Marcus looked down at that small hand on his arm, the hand of a woman who knew he was a monster and stayed anyway. The hand of a woman who didn't ask what he'd done, only whether he was hurt. He covered her hand with his and squeezed gently. He told her he would always protect her, at any cost. And for the first time, Vivian believed that promise wasn't only words. The federal courthouse in Manhattan had never seen a hearing draw this much attention. Reporters packed the sidewalk outside the building. Cameras kept rolling without pause. The whole city was watching the case between Preston Ashford, a respected real estate tycoon, and Vivian Ashford, the abandoned wife he had once called mentally unstable. Vivian walked into the courtroom in a simple navy blue dress, her hair pinned into a neat bun, her face calm even as her heart hammered out of control in her chest. Marcus walked beside her, not as a Mafia boss, but as her protector. He wore a black suit, dark sunglasses, and took a seat directly behind her like a silent fortress. Preston sat on the other side, flanked by the most expensive legal team New York could buy. He tried to hold on to his usual confidence, but Vivian noticed the worried lines on his forehead, noticed the way his gaze kept flicking toward the door, as if he were searching for an escape route. Judge Margaret Thornton struck the gavel and the session began. Jonathan Pierce, Vivian's attorney, stood. He was a 50-year-old man with silver hair and eyes sharp as knives. 30 years in the profession had taught him how to destroy an opponent with the truth. He addressed the court, his voice carrying through the room, and said that today he would prove Preston Ashford wasn't only a terrible husband, that he was a systematic con man, a forger of federal documents, and a man who had plotted to ruin the lives of many women over the course of years. Preston gave a mocking snort, but the smile died the moment Jonathan projected documents from Bianca's USB drive onto the screen. Jonathan identified the custody relinquishment agreement Preston claimed. Vivian had signed 6 months before the divorce, zoomed in on the signature, and presented analysis from 3 independent experts, all confirming the signature was forged. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Preston bent toward his lawyer and hissed something, his face flushing red. Jonathan went on, laying out each piece of evidence in turn. A forged emergency medical consent form that would have allowed Preston to decide the fate of the fetuses if Vivian died, emails with his attorney discussing how to destroy his wife's reputation, and a detailed plan to send the 3 children to an orphanage after winning custody. Jonathan said Preston didn't want to raise his children. He only wanted to punish a woman who dared to leave him. Then the first witness was called. Meredith Collins stepped onto the stand, with her back straight and her eyes fixed on Preston. She was no longer the frightened woman hiding in Vermont. She was a warrior demanding justice. She testified that 6 years earlier, she had been Preston Ashford's fiancé, and that he had ruined her life using the same tactics he was now using against Vivian. Forged evidence, weaponized claims of mental illness, destroyed her career and her name. She told everything, every detail, every wound, every night she had cried alone in an empty apartment after losing everything. Preston sat there as his face drained whiter and whiter, until he looked like a corpse. The second witness shook the room even more. Bianca Moretti took the stand, her belly clearly showing beneath her dress. She was the mistress Preston had left Vivian for, and now she was testifying against him. Bianca said Preston hit her, that the first time was 2 months after she moved in with him, that he told her it was her fault and she believed him, but then she found the USB drive in his safe and realized she wasn't the first victim and wouldn't be the last. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Thornton struck the gavel again and again to restore order. Preston sprang to his feet, his face twisting with rage, shouting that she was lying, that all of them were lying, that it was a conspiracy. Judge Thornton barked at him to sit down immediately, but Preston didn't listen. He turned on Vivian, his eyes bloodshot like a cornered animal, and screamed that she would pay, that she thought she could beat him, that he would destroy her. Before he could say more, 2 federal officers entered the courtroom. One of them announced Preston Ashford was under arrest for forging federal documents, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice, informed him of his right to remain silent, and warned that anything he said could and would be used against him in court. The click of handcuffs locking shut rang through the courtroom like a victory song. Preston was led away, still screaming meaningless threats, and he threw Vivian one last look filled with hatred. But Vivian wasn't afraid anymore. She stood there with tears streaming down her cheeks, not from pain, but from relief, from justice, from the knowledge that the nightmare had finally ended. Judge Thornton struck the gavel one final time and ruled that full custody belonged to the mother, Vivian Ashford. And in that moment, Vivian turned and looked back at Marcus. He was still sitting there, and his gray eyes were gentler than she had ever seen them. She had won. They had won. 1 week after the hearing, Preston Ashford was formally indicted on 17 federal counts. His attorneys said he could be facing 15 to 20 years in prison. His real estate empire collapsed like dominoes. Partners turned their backs. Banks froze his accounts. The media dug up every dark secret he'd hidden for years. Preston Ashford, once a king, was now just a criminal waiting for trial. Vivian stood in the room, looking at her 3 babies sleeping in their cribs. They'd been discharged 2 weeks earlier, and they were growing stronger every day, healthy and beautiful. She had named them Emma, Noah, and Lily, 3 little angels she had nearly paid for with her life. Beside the cribs were suitcases already packed. She had decided to leave, not because she wasn't grateful to Marcus, not because she was afraid of him, but because she didn't want to become a burden. She had her children back. She had a settlement from the lawsuit. She could start over somewhere far from Manhattan, far from painful memories, far from the underworld Marcus belonged to. You were going to go without saying goodbye. The low voice came from the doorway. Vivian turned and saw Marcus leaning against the frame, gray eyes on her with something she couldn't read. I was going to write a letter, she said softly. I didn't know what to say face to face. Marcus stepped into the room and stopped a few feet away. Then let me speak first, he said. She looked at him and waited. Marcus drew in a slow breath. This wasn't something he was used to. Talking about feelings, about the past, about wounds that hadn't healed. But if he didn't speak now, he knew he would lose her forever. You know about Daniel, he began, his voice lower than usual. My brother, the one who died because Preston betrayed us 8 years ago. Vivian nodded. She remembered. She would never forget. Daniel was the only person in my family who still believed in anything good, Marcus continued. My father taught me how to kill before he taught me how to love. My mother died when I was 12, but Daniel was different. He had a pure heart. He believed I could become someone better. He paused, his jaw tightening. When Daniel died, the best part of me died with him. I swore I would take revenge on Preston. I waited 8 years, and when you collapsed in front of me that night, when I learned you were his wife, he met Vivian's eyes. I thought it was an opportunity. Save you, protect you, use you like a piece on the board to destroy Preston. That was my first thought. I won't deny it. Vivian felt her heart constrict. She'd suspected it, but hearing Marcus say it still hurt. But then everything changed. Marcus said, his voice softening. You weren't a piece. You were the strongest woman I'd ever met. You knew who I was, what I did, how much blood was on my hands. And you didn't run. You didn't judge me. You asked if I was hurt. He took one step closer. You looked into the darkness in me and you weren't afraid. You saw the monster and you stayed. You gave me something no one has given me since Daniel died. What? Vivian whispered. A reason to become better. Silence fell. Marcus lifted his hand and brushed her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized was there. I don't deserve you, he said. I know that. My hands are stained. My soul is dark. But if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life protecting you and the children. Not because of hatred for Preston, but because... He stopped, as if the next word was too hard to say. Because I love you. Vivian looked at him, looked into gray eyes that had once been ice, now burning with a gentler fire, looked at the face of a Mafia boss standing in front of her without armor, without weapons, with only a bare heart waiting for her judgment. She thought of Preston, who had said I love you in honeyed words while hiding a blade behind his back. She thought of Marcus, who never spoke pretty sentences, but had stood beside her through every storm. She placed her hand on his chest, where his heart was beating hard beneath his shirt. You think you're darkness, she whispered. But darkness doesn't save people. Darkness doesn't stay awake all night by a hospital bed. Darkness doesn't cry when I nearly die on an operating table. She smiled, tears still falling. You're a different kind of light, Marcus. The kind of light only darkness can create. She rose onto her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his mouth. I'm staying. 1 year later, the Long Island estate was filled with the laughter of children. Emma, Noah, and Lily could crawl now, could babble their first sounds, and were learning to stand on their tiny legs. The house that had once felt cold and silent was now alive with brightly colored toys, beautiful little cribs, and the warm smell of milk every morning. Vivian stood by the living room window, looking out at the garden where Marcus sat on the grass with the 3 children. Emma gripped his finger and giggled. Noah was trying to climb into his lap. Lily lay against his chest, wide-eyed, staring up at the face of the man she called Dad. Dad. The word had come for the first time 2 months earlier, when Emma had pointed at Marcus and babbled Baba. Marcus had frozen in place, gray eyes shining in a way Vivian had never seen. The most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast had cried because of a name spoken by a child who didn't share his blood. Vivian smiled and stepped outside. Marcus looked up at her, a rare smile appearing on his mouth. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined that face could smile. A year ago, she thought her life had ended on the sidewalk on 5th Avenue. Now she had a family. Marcus was still the boss. He still ran his underworld empire, still attended secret meetings, still carried a name that made enemies afraid. But he had changed. No more ruthless cleanups. No more meaningless violence. He set new boundaries for his organization. No women and children. No dealing in anything that destroyed families. Victor says you have a meeting tonight, Vivian said as she sat beside him. Marcus nodded. Chicago wants to renegotiate the agreement. Will you be home late? He looked at her, then at the 3 children playing. No, he said. I'll be back in time for dinner. Victor stepped out of the back door, his face as cold as ever. But Vivian noticed the corner of his mouth lift slightly when he looked at the children. Boss, there's an issue in Brooklyn, Victor reported. Marcus stood. But before he left, he bent down and kissed each child on the forehead, then kissed Vivian on the mouth. I'll be back, he said. Vivian watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing beyond the gate. She knew who he was. She knew how dangerous his world was. But she also knew that beneath the darkness was a heart that had learned how to love. That night, Marcus came home in time for dinner, just as he'd promised. They sat around the table, the 3 children in their high chairs, Vivian and Marcus facing each other. A normal family meal. Something Vivian had once believed she would never have. After dinner, when the 3 children were asleep, Marcus stood by the window looking out at the sea. Vivian walked over and rested her head on his shoulder. What are you thinking about? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking about Daniel, he said. About what he would say if he could see me now. What would he say? Marcus smiled, his gray eyes gentle. He would say that I finally found something worth protecting. Vivian tightened her grip on his hand. Outside, the ocean kept breaking into waves. The underworld was still wrapped in darkness, but inside this estate there was a family. There was love, there was light. The darkness didn't disappear. It only found something worth protecting. This story is proof that no matter how dark life becomes, it can still find light, that even the deepest wounds can be healed by love and sincerity. Sometimes the ones who save us aren't angels, but people who carry their own darkness and still choose to stand beside us when the whole world turns away. Remember that a person's worth isn't defined by the past they carry, but by what they choose to do with the future. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Don't forget to like and share this video with the people you love so we have more motivation to bring you meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had a moment that felt like everything was collapsing, only for you to find something miraculous you never expected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories and feelings from the deepest part of your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, and a peaceful soul every day. Thank you for being here with us. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.